Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining Karmic Patterns Vedic Astrology podcast. Today is January 31st, 2017, the last day of the year. This is my sixth podcast. Today, we're going to talk about some really important and unique phenomena associated with the full moon that's coming up tomorrow on New Year's Day. I know that New Year's Day is a time where so many of us start to commit to new beginnings, new health regimes, whether it's food or meditation or exercise, whatever the case. I know that the new year brings new beginnings for so many people. And this podcast is going to be really important as it relates to these new beginnings and the timing around those because of the way that the moon is falling within the zodiac. So there's some really specific astrological information that I'm going to share with you that will help you support these new beginnings going into the new year. But before I do that, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the astronomy associated with this full moon, because there is some special astronomical phenomena associated with it. I'm going to talk a little bit about aspects from other planets to the moon, so influences to the moon, and then the indications of the nakshatra or lunar mansion that this full moon will be falling within. So let's start with the astronomy. This full moon is technically called a supermoon. Okay, so you can see from this diagram here, basically it's essentially falling very close to the Earth. Okay, so the top left-hand corner that you see, perigee and apogee, you've got the moon, you've got the Earth, and the moon is going to be at perigee. It's going to be at the closest distance that the moon reaches to the Earth in its elliptical orbit. So that results in a much larger than usual apparent size of the moon as we view it from Earth. And the last time that we had a full moon in Gemini and within the nakshatra of Ardra was on January 1st, 1999. And this is associated with the metonic cycles of the moon, and I'm not going to get into that, but if you want to Google it, there's a lot of information out there on the metonic cycles of the moon. And this is really significant because so many indications and meanings of the planets come from the visible observation in the sky. That's how the ancient rishis did it, and it's important for those of you who are starting to study Jyotish or who have even studied Jyotish for a long time. If you haven't paid a lot of attention to the observable nature of the planet as it moves through the sky through its different phases, whether it's the moon or any of the other planets, whether they're retrograde or direct, it's very significant to observe that. And this full moon, is actually one of two full moons that is going to occur in January. So we have a supermoon, and we also have a blue moon on January 31st at the end of the month. And the full moon, blue moon that's occurring at the end of the month is actually going to be a lunar eclipse, but I'm not going to get into that at all today. I'll do that later. So there's a lot of significant phenomena. And then the other thing is tomorrow is Monday, and Monday is the day of the moon. So we have a full moon occurring on Moon Day or on Monday, which is just beautiful. So there is a lot of really terrific things that are going to be occurring around this full moon. So some of the data around the timing, and I'm going to give Pacific times. So you'll you'll have to convert this to your time zone. But the full moon tithi, or the lunar phase, the full moon Purnima lunar phase begins January 1st at 10:14 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The moon will be at its fullest at 6:23 p.m. Monday, January 1st, Pacific Standard Time. It will be over the horizon for us here in the Pacific Northwest at the time of its fullest. You'll want to check, I think it's time and date. You can Google moonrise, moonset, time and date, and it will give you the times for your time zone. But moonrise today in Seattle is 3:34 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then tomorrow it'll be 4:34 p.m. So it will definitely be up over the eastern horizon tomorrow when it's reaching its fullest at 4:34 p.m. So be sure to look to the east at that time. And then if it's clear, I'm crossing my fingers here, that it's going to be clear here in the Northwest, 6:23 p.m., make sure to have a look and take some time to meditate on this full moon and the endings that you want to set your intentions for the new year and for this lunar cycle. Before I get going with the rest of the full moon forecast, I just want to say, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel and you want to be notified of future podcasts, please click the down arrow button below the video frame and hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button as well. It really helps me understand whether or not I'm giving you information that's valuable and informational and educational and enjoyable. So that's super important to me as well. So as I said, this full moon is going to be excellent for endings. And that is, particularly because of the cycle that it's in and because it's falling within the nakshatra of Ardra. But I want to go into some of the aspects and influences to the moon before I talk about the nakshatra influence, some of the planetary aspects and influences. So this is the South Indian chart. I have both North and South Indian charts here, but I work with the South Indian, so I'm going to go off of that while I do the influences to the moon. So you can see here that the moon is falling within the sidereal sign of Gemini and within the nakshatra of Ardra. And you can see here, if it's a full moon, the sun here and the moon here, they are always opposite one another in the chart. That's how you know it's a full moon. And you can see there's a lot of planetary influences. We have Venus and Saturn are sitting with the sun, and Venus and Saturn are both casting their gaze or their drishti to the moon. And so Saturn, being the planet of structure and organization and responsibility, is going to be calling upon us at this full moon to really be responsible. And if we make a commitment to certain changes in our lives, Saturn is saying, okay, we really need to get serious here. And then Venus, of course, is there. Venus is in a little bit of a difficult position because, as you can see here, Venus is literally kind of sandwiched in between the Sun and Saturn. Sun and Saturn are considered to be Krura, Krura, Krura grahas. They are cruel planets. And so when benefics like Venus or Jupiter or the moon get caught in between Krura planets, they get a little bit restricted with regard to their ability to do good. And so Venus, for those of you who are ruled by Venus, Libra or Taurus rising, if you feel a little bit frustrated and feel like you can't quite accomplish what you want to, part of that may have something to do with this transit of Venus. But regardless, Venus will be closely aspecting the moon because it's at 15 degrees 48 minutes of Sagittarius and is almost directly opposite the moon. So certainly Venus is a planet of love and relationships and beauty and harmony and diplomacy and procreation. That will factor into the influence to the moon as well. However, Venus is also, not only is it Papakatari, sandwiched in between Sun and Saturn, it is also combust, or as expressed in Western astrology, it's Kazimi. And for those of you who are watching, if you're Western astrologers, these influences will remain the same as what you're seeing here, but the calculations will be based on the tropical zodiac. You know, the placements will be different in the tropical system versus the sidereal system, but the influences will be the same, and the time of the full moon and all of that will remain the same, if that helps. So Venus is combust the sun, so a lot of the, the physical indications of Venus, especially if they represent an individual within the horoscope, like a sibling or a parent or something like that, that could be certainly hampered by this closeness to the sun. But other than that, it's really more of an internalization of the qualities of Venus as Venus comes close to the sun and becomes fully combust. And that is going to finally dissipate as Venus moves past the sun on January 8th. Although technically Venus is still going to be in a Papakatari yoga, or hemmed in between the sun and Ketu through the end of January. So all my Libra and Taurus rising friends, hang on. it'll be over soon, okay? Now, also you can see that Jupiter is going to be in a trine. So Jupiter is here in Libra, and it is 9 houses away from the moon. So that's a very strong dharmic aspect from Jupiter to the moon, and that's a wonderful influence to have to this full moon, and it will kind of offset some of the somber influences that Saturn gives to the moon. So it's a more buoyant, freedom-loving, spiritual influence from Jupiter that is going to be aspecting to the moon. Mars is also in trines. While technically in Jyotish or Vedic astrology it's not considered a full aspect, it is still aspecting the moon. So we have Sun, Venus, Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter all aspecting the moon. So 5 planets, that's quite a lot of energy. And especially when we have a super moon, the full moon, etc., that is going to be a lot of energy. So as we go into New Year's Eve tonight, make sure, stay safe and, be mindful of the energy around you, because it's quite a lot that is going on to the moon. Now, there is something really interesting beyond all the influences, beyond the supermoon, beyond the fact that it's falling within Ardra Nakshatra for the first time in 18 years. The moon is placed in a position within Gemini that is called Pushkar Navamsha. And for those of you who are not familiar, the Navamsha is a resonance of the birth chart. It's a divisional chart, one of the significant divisional charts that Jyotishis use to determine strengths and influences to planets. And this Pushkar Navamsha falls within the D9 chart, the divisional chart. And they are special degrees. I'm not going to get into a big, long explanation about Pushkar Navamsha. There's a lot out there around that online. So I would encourage you to research that if you're interested in that, in learning more. But the important thing to know is that these are really special degrees, and they're associated with good fortune and positive energy. So that's wonderful. Again, that's another supportive element for setting our intentions and having positive outcomes once we get into the new year and start working on all those things that we all have. I know I have my list. So that is the energy associated with the full moon and the different planets. So I'll leave this slide up for a minute for those of you who work with the North Indian chart. Oh, I also want to mention that this Pushkar Navamsha occurs at 5:03 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And going up to the full moon to 6:23 will be the most auspicious time for working with the energy of Pushkar Navamsha as it comes to the full. Certainly Pushkar Navamsha lasts beyond 6:23, but after 6:23 p.m. the moon will shift to waning, and it'll be a completely different energy. So 5:03 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 6:23 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Ardra Nakshatra. I love this image that I found. There's an artist, I'm not sure I can pronounce her name properly, but Mushk wonderful, wonderful image of Arneshwara, and this is certainly Ardhanarishwara, if I'm saying it right, is also connected to Rudra, to Shiva, and Rudra is the deity that is associated with Ardra. Rudra can be interpreted as one who cries or who howls. Rudra was born from the brow of Brahma. He got angry because he had created 4 sons to, populate the earth and create and go through the cycle of birth and death and rebirth, and they didn't want to do that. He got really angry. And so from that anger, from his brow, the deity Rudra came from Brahma's brow, and he came out howling or crying, right? So if you think of how angry Brahma must have been, for his sons to not want to, help him with the creation process, right? Because Brahma is associated with creation. And Rudra is also connected to storms and destruction. And I often think of, we live in an area that is very volatile weather-wise, particularly in the fall and winter and early spring even. We're in an area that gets howling winds, right? I think of Rudra. There's got to be a lot of Rudra energy here. But what is so interesting is that we get these crazy storms, literally, 40, 50, 60, and up to 70 miles an hour winds. And, we can see the clouds coming, from and around the Olympic Mountains in the area. But after that, there's this really interesting occurrence that happens in this area. I think it's called the blue hole. We call it the squim hole because there's an area called Squim where it kind of begins. We can see it beginning across the water. So from Port Townsend to Squim, Washington, up to the San Juan Islands, and then down like Whidbey Island and just north Whidbey Island and that area, and then actually even over to Victoria, which is right across the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Literally, it's like this hole appears. You can see it on the radar. This blue sky appears, and all around us there's there's these gray clouds and storm, and you can see the rain falling everywhere. And that phenomena really reminds me of Rudra because it's certainly a very cleansing kind of energy that's associated with Rudra. It's really about creating, right? Only after a lot of struggle and sorrow. The symbol of Ardra is the teardrop or a jewel or a head. And so it's really, after this, using the power of Ardra to achieve through our efforts, our own efforts, And after the storm clears, that we can really have a clear vision and see kind of the underlying mystical and spiritual elements that are associated with this nakshatra, and that destruction that is making way for creation. And I see this really more from an emotional perspective for this full moon, because this full moon, the moon is the mind, it is the emotions, right? It is the planet that connects to peace of mind. Influences to the moon, when there are difficult influences to the moon, like from Saturn or from Mars, it can be anger or anxiety. And so the moon is very, very important in our day-to-day life, and how we nourish ourselves, nourish others, maintain our peace of mind, and our ability to really be social, because the moon connects to sociability as well. So there is a really strong element of destruction associated with this nakshatra and this full supermoon, that can make way for regeneration, creation. And so that is something to really keep in mind. What is it that, within our consciousness, right, that needs to be destroyed to be recreated, so that we can achieve what we want to achieve and utilize this energy. Trying to think. Oh, the other thing that's interesting about this placement, within the fourth pada of Ardra, there are, within each lunar mansion or nakshatra, there are 4 equal parts, and each pada has Purush Artha, or a purpose associated with it, and each nakshatra has a purpose associated with it. So Ardra Nakshatra is connected to Kama, to desire, right? If we think of Brahma and his desire to, populate the earth with his sons, and how Rudra was born from that desire, that's very, very strong within this nakshatra. But the fourth pada of Ardra is associated with moksha. So that's an interesting polarity between the two. So there may be some strong desire to, eliminate certain behaviors, et cetera, as we go into the new year. But there will also be an underlying spiritual element to the quality of this full moon, and the way, the way that we're thinking about it. I think that's really all I can say about Ardra. Just if you want to learn more, again, I would encourage you to Google Rudra, and there's a lot of stories around Ardhanarishvara and Rudra and Shiva, more than what I've talked about today. Certainly how Ardhanarishvara is associated with Rudra, and that's a really interesting story as well. So definitely I would encourage you to check that out. And basically, I just want to wish everyone a happy new year. Wish you all well, peace and abundance and bliss for 2018, which I cannot believe is tomorrow. This last year went so quickly. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and being so supportive of my podcast. I have a lot more coming down the road. Also, I was a guest. If you didn't get a chance to listen, I was a guest on Cody Ricketts' Addicted to Spirit podcast. I'll put a link in the comments below the YouTube video if you want to check that video out. It was a lot of fun to talk with him about Vedic astrology. And I guess that's it. So happy New Year, set your intentions, and I'll see you on the other side.